There was an agenda item yesterday, which the organizing committee decided to postpone it to this morning so that we could have your full attention. We think it's a very important aspect of this conference, so we decided that we would have it done this morning rather than yesterday evening. And this was the unveiling of the Africa Land Policy Center. So we think it's very important that we also have a bit of a background in terms of how we came to where we are today, putting together the African Land Policy Center. In my statement yesterday, I had also indicated that we had a decision, an AU declaration of our heads of state and government in July of 2009, where the AU Declaration on Land Issues and Challenges was adopted. And then we also have a governing body for the Land Policy Initiative, which is known as the Steering Committee, and this is chaired by the African Union Commission. And in October of 2012, this steering committee approved the terms of reference and methodology for conducting a study on how we were actually going to institutionalize the work on land on our continent, because this was also one of the key decisions that was adopted in 2009, that the AU Commission, the Africa Development Bank, and the UN Economic Commission for Africa needed to come up with a more long-term strategy and structure in terms of how we begin to manage and coordinate land-related issues on the continent. So we had the study conducted looking at various models of how the institution would be structured. And in 2013, September 30th, we organized a workshop to validate the proposal that we had come up with. And I think quite a number of us in this room were also present during the validation workshop. And then the Land Policy Initiative presented these recommendations to the inaugural session of the African Union Specialized Technical Committee on Agricultural, Rural Development, Water and Environment for adoption. And this was endorsed by the STC in the first session, which took place in October of 2015. And then when we had the second session of the STC from the African Union Commission, a decision was adopted for the ALPC to be institutionalized in a manner that will ensure financial stability, operational efficiency, and also strong ownership of the structure and institution. And also at the level of the UN Economic Commission for Africa, the Committee for Regional Cooperation and Integration in 2015 endorsed the establishment of the Africa Land Policy Center. And in 2017, the same policy organ of the ECA endorsed the institutionalizing of the Africa Land Policy Center. And the Africa Development Bank, through its Feed Africa Strategy Implementation Plan, also endorses the ALPC as an avenue to lead in securing of land rights. We have 4 key mandates for the Africa Land Policy Center, and these 4 key mandates resonate around issues of leadership, policy and advocacy, partnerships and linkages, and also on coordination. So for us, we see this as the 4 key areas where we will be seeing the Land Policy Center really focusing its impact and its work on. On leadership, it would actually be working in terms of ensuring that we are setting the agenda on land issues. The center will be acting as a repository of knowledge and also representing our continent on global platforms. On issues of policy and advocacy, we envision the center as being a key driver of the land continental policy to ensure that land remains a priority in our policy agenda. And most importantly, on issues of coordination, which is also very critical as we try to address the issues of land governance, land tenure security, and land challenges on our continent. The ALPC would also be providing a continental and regional platform that will enhance the coordination of all of these activities within the land sector. And finally, issues of partnerships and linkages. We look at the center as being the channel through which we'll be able to create linkages, we'll be able to have strong partnerships, bridge gaps in terms of providing technical assistance and funding. The Africa Land Policy Center governance structure would still remain as it was when it was the Land Policy Initiative, having the African Union Commission as the chair, and then the UN Economic Commission for Africa and the Africa Development Bank working together with us within what we call the Joint Working Group on Land. And the steering committee members and the structure also remains the same. And this is how we think we would also be ensuring that the issues being brought to the policy agenda of the continent is going through the necessary clearance and adoption by our policy organs. So let me give the floor very briefly now to my colleague, Dr. Joan Kagwanja, who will take us through some of the key focus areas and some of the thematic areas that the Africa Land Policy Center would also be focusing on. Joan?
Thank you, and a big welcome here. My name is Joan Kagwanja. I'm the coordinator of the Africa Land Policy Center. As Dr. Edeme has mentioned, we take cue from the decisions that have been made, but we also provide the technical assistance to set new agenda in different areas of land governance. So our focus will be based on coordinating ourselves as the implementation mechanism. Every single person here represents an institution that is part of the implementation mechanism. Whether you are directly implementing, or you are facilitating, or you're funding, or you're providing technical support, or you're advocating for the AU agenda on land. So our role as the center will be in providing that technical guidance that helps to coordinate ourselves. And we take cue from the decisions that have already been made. So in the area of land policy development, for instance, we have the decisions that were made by the AU heads of states and government, including their commitment to lead policy processes, their commitment to provide institutional and technical support, and also to provide financial resources, their commitment to ensure that the land policies that are developed provide security of tenure for all land users, and also their commitment to ensure that women's land rights are strengthened. In doing so, we shall also be drawing on some of the other decisions that have been made, including an AU decision that we move towards allocating 30% of documented land rights to women by 2025. So if you think about it, we then have to focus on issues of land policy development. We will have to focus on issues of land administration and institutional mechanisms to strengthen those institutions. And we will have to focus especially on issues of monitoring data and statistics. This is an area where, as you will see throughout the conference, we are helping to build capacities for instance, through the monitoring and evaluation of land governance in Africa, in collaboration with many of you, including IFPRI. And again, we then cannot avoid having a program around the issues of gender, women, and land, because we need to advance that particular agenda. As you all know, in 2010, we also had a key decision in the auspices of the Nairobi Action Plan on large-scale land-based investments. And in this regard, we shall be advancing the implementation or the use of the guiding principles on large-scale land-based investments, themselves endorsed again by the AU STC in 2015. In this case, we shall then have a program around the issues of land investments and agriculture. We take cue also from the Malabo Declaration of 2014 that has endorsed CADIP, the Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program, but also in the context of mainstreaming land governance in our agricultural investment plans. We will also be targeting the issue of land, natural resources, and conflicts. We have very recently gotten an endorsement to develop guidelines that will help us to address the issues of land and ethnic-based conflicts. So this is an area that still is a main area for the continent to focus on, and we shall be providing a space for all of us to provide the knowledge and the platforms that are needed to address this particular issue. The issue of urban settlements, as you know, is one where we have a growing urban population, and we need to examine how we provide the land rights and the spaces needed for the growing urban populations in a sustainable manner, working closely with our colleagues from UN Habitat and others. And therefore, we shall focus in an area on land settlements and urban development, working closely with our partners. Finally, this conference is focusing on the issue of youth and facilitating access to land for the youth to ensure that they play a meaningful role in development. I keep being reminded by Rachel to say women and men, youth, not just youth in general, because we might forget to also focus on the issue of ensuring that both men and women are benefiting there. So we shall also work closely with our friends like Edson from the Africa Development Bank, who will be talking to us this morning to advance this area of land use and issue of migration and employment as well. So in other words, those are some of the key issues we'll be advancing because they are pertinent. They are not the only issues, but our main focus right now is on the areas where we have consensus as a continent on key decisions, and also a mandate to move forward to examine some of these areas. For instance, a mandate from our steering committee to examine the issue of youth. Obviously, the issue of land convergence and harmonization is important to us. Our regional economic communities are our partners, and we have been advancing some work on mainstreaming land governance in the programs of our 8 RECs that are recognized by the African Union, and we shall continue to do that in our regional programs. Now, in terms of the key intervention areas, we will continue to, like you've heard from Dr. Ideme, to look at the area of ensuring that we have the knowledge that is required, working through and with our universities, our centers of excellence, our research institutions. And the recent Network of Excellence on Land Governance in Africa will be an amplifier to that work. And that also goes for the area of capacity development that we shall continue to advance through the partnerships that we have also with our development partners. And finally, 2 areas, obviously, in terms of linkages and partnerships, we shall continue to advance that. And our communication and advocacy, as you have seen, one of the mandates is to ensure that we have a global platform, but also a regional and other platforms for advocacy. So this is how we foresee the Africa Land Policy Center coordinating the implementation of the AU Agenda on Land and leading all of us towards that purpose. Thank you. Does it work? No.
Thank you very much, Joanne. I think it's important that we also share with you some of our perspectives as to why we came up with the logo that we have for the Africa Land Policy Center. The C in the word center indicates that land is all-encompassing with regards to what is on the land and what is in the land and what is over the land. So when we're talking of what is under the land, we're talking about our minerals, which is represented there in brown, our vegetation in green, and also the water. And if you can see through, we have someone in the middle. It shows also that issues related to land, as was indicated in the recitation of the poem yesterday, is people-centered. And being people-centered, if you look towards the bottom, we're also rooted. We have the roots in our culture, we have the roots in our resources, and we have the roots in our strength. So this is the perspective we had when we came up with this logo for the Africa Land Policy Center. And we hope and believe that as the ALPC begins undertaking the task that we have mandated it with, we would always have this at the back of our minds. I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Good morning. I want to thank Joanne and Dr. Ndeme for introducing the African Land Policy Center. I think we started with an initiative that is now a permanent and sustainable center. And this morning, our session here is to focus on the dialogue run by the ministers and people representing institutions of governance responsible for land in this country. My name is Rexford Ahini. As you can see from the papers sent around, I'm affiliated with the World Bank and FAO as a specialist on land administration and land policy. I'm a professor of economics and public policy, and for 30 years I've been involved in trying to nurture and work with my colleagues here and all of you to develop land policy and land administration structures and institutions for Africa. It is a great day to be here today to see a center that focuses on the capacity building required, providing guidelines and direction, advocacy, and of course, the monitoring of the implementation and development of the policies that touches and improves people's lives. On our panel today, we have 4 people. We have Honorable Utoni Njuma, Ministry of Lands from Namibia. We have Honorable Ato Belete, Head of the National Integrated Land Use Policy and Planning Project for Ethiopia. Mr. Richard Oput, representing the Ministry of Lands and Housing and Urban Development in Uganda. And Mr. Edson Mpisi, Coordinator of Enable Youth Programs in Africa Development Bank. Our format today is to allow each representative here to make an opening remark and make a couple of comments. And then after that, we'll open it up with a free-flowing dialogue with a couple of well-framed questions that will solicit their response and their contribution to engaging the youth of Africa to achieve the socioeconomic transformation through inclusive, equitable, and accessible rights to land for the youth. This is the theme of the conference. We want to see how our representatives of government have and feel about this theme for today. So I'm going to call on Honorable Utomi Ujoma, Minister of Lands for Namibia, to make a few comments. And please, you can make your comments from the seat, or if you want to come over here, actually do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. From the outset, I would like to register the Republic of Namibia and the Ministry of Land Reform's appreciation to the African Union Commission, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, the Land Policy Initiative, and the African Development Bank for organizing this conference on land policy in Africa and for convening this ministerial dialogue. Land and youth issues are very current and topical in Namibia, regionally, continentally, and internationally, as we have heard yesterday. Youth issues should be kept in the public domain under continual discussion for better policy development. Government, civil society, and the private sector should work together to address youth issues for better governance. The youth are part of the development agenda in Namibia. They are included in all our national development programs, and the youth ministry was set up immediately after independence to deal directly with issues pertaining and affecting the youth. The major guiding principles of our land reform program are premised on addressing socioeconomic inequalities that are present in our country, and the youth are part of this. The current policy and legal framework gives equal opportunities to all Namibians to own land and be allocated land under the resettlement program. The statistics on youth are well known, accounting for nearly 70% of the population or populations of many developing countries and up to 90% of the population of some of the economically least developed nations. Africa south of the Sahara has the world's youngest and fastest growing population, and our country falls in this category. Many of the youth in our countries are not literate. Many lack access to information, land, housing, and sanitation, employment, and many are living with HIV/AIDS. The agricultural sector in Africa currently employs most of Africa's young people and is likely to remain so in the future. In cognizance of the economic importance of this sector to people's livelihoods, the government in Namibia has since independence taken steps to purchase land under the land reform program to facilitate the accessibility to agricultural land by the Namibian people in the framework of social justice and economic empowerment. The youth today should derive satisfaction from the fact that their challenges, perspectives, and dreams are being accommodated in government, and many have found expressions in the Constitution, legislations, and policies, and in a multi-sectoral framework. The government recognizes that our country has a high youth population, and this fact has compelled government to pay particular attention to the needs of these groups. Since independence, the government has made strides in mainstreaming youth development initiatives across government departments, municipalities, and through public-private sector partnerships. The creation of a ministry to look into the issues affecting the young in our country attests to this commitment. The role played by the private sector in skills development, training, and mentorship has been tremendous, although there is still a need for continued contribution towards programs earmarked for public-private sector partnership in the quest for excellence and perfection within the youth. The concerns of the youth and their potential as development actors has so far captured the government development agenda by attracting the full attention of policymakers and development partners in general. There is, however, an urgent need to develop clear strategies and policies aimed at promoting the participation of young people as important stakeholders, actors, and partners. Such strategies could include the enhancement of the established institution that set the youth issue as a national priority, increasing their current involvement in policy-making processes, exploring policy options, providing more opportunities for policy dialogue with the youth, and building institutional capacity to fill the gaps. It is in this connection that the other youth issues could be critically analyzed to determine the complexity and gravity to the challenges facing them in our country, with the core objective of devising specific strategies and mechanisms to include youth as central stakeholders in sustainable development in their countries. Although there are many sectors where young people could be absorbed within the different sectors of our economy, the agricultural sector offers more opportunities. Namibia, like most African countries, has abundant resources suitable for agriculture, especially land, water, and labor. Young people who are interested in taking up farming and establishing farms will require to be skilled, mentored, and have equal access to capital, research and extension, and open markets to avoid daunting hurdles. As a government, we continue to recognize and prioritize the importance of agriculture as one of the key sectors for employment and redouble efforts to transform the sector. Despite current commitments to invest in agriculture, there is still need to convert rhetorical commitment to agriculture into actions, into meaningful actions that transform the lives of our young people. May I end up here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. I think it's obvious from the opening comments, that policies and practices for broadening and securing sustainable and equitable access to land and control of land-based resources, and the provision of rural services that fully respect the rights and aspirations of all citizens should not be just inclusive of the rights of women and marginalized and vulnerable groups, but also pay particular attention to the aspirations of the youth. I'm going to call on Honorable Belete to make his opening comments on behalf of Ethiopia, as the head of the National Integrated Land Use Planning and Policy Project. Please, you can do it from your seat. Thank you.
Excellencies, ministers, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I'm not going to make it on the podium because I'm not prepared in that way. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for making this very important and timely issue on the land governance. The theme, the Africa we want, achieving socioeconomic transformation through incentives, through inclusive and equitable access to land by the law, for me is very timely. I assume this is a theme that has picked the right issue, the land governance issue, which indeed is the challenge of the day. The economy of Africa, and particularly Ethiopia, is still agrarian, rural-based, where 80% of the livelihood is based. And as for our statistics, 36% of the GDP is also coming from agriculture. As well, much of the youth population we have in the country lives in the countryside, where we can say, though the Constitution makes them availed or to be availed with the necessary land holding for cultivation, as long as they reside there, because of the fragmentations, most of these are known to be landless. And then, however this is the case, the government is devising strategies to accommodate them in these areas. And thanks to the relentless effort we're making in the rural areas, in the natural resource management, we are registering an improvement in the landscapes, and therefore the government is trying to accommodate these in these landscapes in any form of the rural livelihood, like apiculture, irrigation, woodlot development, and likewise. Actually, as the country is progressing also economically, and we have these very days mushrooming of towns and cities, but otherwise, as we lack the integration of land use systems, and then there is this problem of urban sprawling, overtaking much of the prime agriculture lands. This all is contributing to the pressure that we have to deal with the youth unemployment. For all these reasons, the Ethiopian development policy has been and is also very oriented towards the development of the rural areas, as well supporting the youth programs. For example, the first strategy we had is the agriculture development-led industrialization, and also followed by the PASDEP, that is Plan of Action for Sustainable Development and Eradicating Poverty. But finally, we have come to the GTP now, and the GTP, as it has to be sustainable, the SDG is adopted, and we have developed a CRG too. Over the last 3 decades, the government of Ethiopia has put a lot of effort to mobilize its people in a wide range of program actions as capacity building. Incentive mechanisms are also developed to accommodate the youth and many other landlesses, and definition of business areas like I mentioned before, and the different social groups, the youth, the women are organized in a micro and small enterprise, and so they are trained and facilitated by financial mechanisms and helped to establish their livelihood on these different activities. In this regard, we can, if I have to mention as a success story, the case of the northern region like Tigray, we all know that this area have been known for serious drought and famine problem. And actually, this was because of the severe land degradations and natural resource deterioration we had in that area. Then, because the government has made a serious social mobilization for the last 30 years or more, the people have been exerting their energy into these degraded landscapes, and the land proved to improve. And then, actually, there is tremendous change coming in the environment, not only in the environment, in the social and economic life. That's why also recently you have heard the region has won the Future Policy Award. And in fact, if you have gone through the UNCCD report on from dry land to green land, then you can find how this had succeeded actually. Well, seeing all these experiences, and because the challenge is also huge enough, and this without looking to have an integrated approach, we cannot come really to any kind of sustainable development. For this reason, the government of Ethiopia have now decided to carry out the land use planning and the land use policy definition. And for this reason, an institution is established, and roadmap is produced, and the policy issue definitions are being carried out. So very soon we'll be able to have the policy clearly defined, the planning done, and much of the different development interventions that we are undergoing would be guided by this. This is how we're trying to address all the different issues we have, and particularly how we're trying to address the issues we have with the youth, especially as they are much of them or most of them residing in the rural areas. I think I would end up here, and if there are any questions from the floor, I mean from the room, I will entertain them later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, sustaining the theme, states have a responsibility to define and provide the incentives and the opportunities for land to be used as an economic asset. But in that regard, land policy, which normally sets out the aspirations of the country, is the starting point. I'm going to call on Mr. Richard Oput from Uganda to make a few comments about the policy process and the direction in which Uganda is going with respect to defining the opportunities, not only for the youth, but for inclusive growth and development.
Thank you. In the case of Uganda, most of the land sector reforms were ushered in after promulgation of our constitution in 1995. Now, that constitution in 1995 also brought in a new land administration and management regime, in which, as previously from 1975, land belonged to the state, and in 1995, one of the major departures from that was the promulgation to the effect that land belongs to the citizens and to be managed in 4 10-year systems. That is leasehold and freehold, which you know about. Then there's another one which is very unique to Uganda called Milo system. And then for the first time, the customary land tenure system was also formally recognized. The Constitution did also promote the decentralization of the land administration and management system, thus changing a little bit the over-centralized approach which was there before, and also created new mechanisms for management of government land, and then also dispute resolution through creation of land tribunals. Now, when the Constitution was promulgated, there was a directive within the Constitution to have a land act in place within 2 years, although this had its own problems. But it did happen, and in 1998, we got a new Land Act. After a period of about 1 year of implementation, we hit a few snags in its implementation, mainly because of the huge implementation structure which was created. It was done in the spirit of ensuring that services would be taken as close as possible to the populace, to the population. Following that, we did develop a land sector strategic plan, which was a framework for institutional, administrative, and financial, which was a framework for administrative, financial, and institutional framework for development and implementation of the Land Act and other land sector reforms. Basically, it had like about 6 areas of operation here. We had to address the issues of policy reform. That is, to put in place a land policy, since we didn't have a national land policy in place. To also develop a national land use policy, which is inherently part of that national land policy. Then review of the legal and legislative framework, particularly regarding most of our laws which were moribund. The second aspect dealt with the inventory of government land. And the main reason for this is that after the change from management of government in a centralized manner to a decentralized manner, the government land became quite insecure. That was quite interesting. The third area dealt with securing livelihoods of vulnerable groups, women, children, and so on, and promoting this through specific interventions in the legal and regulatory framework, and also other areas involving promotion of relationship between the non-state actors and government, which would then have specific interventions in improving the livelihoods of women and other vulnerable groups. And then also the sensitization aspects to go with this. The fourth main area dealt with the development and implementation of the land information system, and then systematic land adjudication, demarcation, survey, and certification or registration on land rights. The fifth area dealt with mainly capacity building to deal with this very, very big new institutional framework which was created, and trying to streamline it as well. So training of the new district land boards, area land committees, and so on, including the new offices which were set up, and then the land professionals which had to go with this. We have gone a long way in implementing this, and I think we'll talk more about this while we're discussing this. But regarding the youth, in our country, the youth constitute about 77% of the population, which live below the below 30 years of age. That's a very, very high number, and that is contributed partly by a very, very high population growth rate of about 3.2%. That can be a challenge, but also an opportunity, depending on how we'll try and handle these issues. But there are specific interventions, particularly at central government level, going down also to the lower government levels, aimed at improving the situation. First of all, there is a ministry responsible for youth, and there is a specific minister of state, a youthful, strong minister in charge of youth. And then to go with these things here, some specific programs were put in place. There is what is called a youth livelihood program, which is a kind of a revolving fund, which is aimed at encouraging the youth to get involved in activities, socioeconomic activities, taking them away from things which take them away from development. Naturally, what is important to note in our case is that 80% of our land is in the rural areas. On top of that, most of the people live in the rural areas for now. So it is important that the land policy which we developed actually addresses this issue. And indeed, this is what has happened. We'll discuss more about that. There are also some interventions regarding skilling, specifically the youth to be able to go into areas of small and medium enterprise development so that they are gainfully employed. But more importantly, because many of the youth live in the rural areas, it is important that the national land policy addresses the issues of land governance so that the youth get gainful employment within the agricultural sector and other related areas. I stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. In the interest of time, let me call on Edson MPC from the African Development Bank to take us to the next level. It is not just policy and institutional framework, legislative laws, and capacity building, but also using land as an asset for economic development, growth, and development. I will call on Mr. MPC to make a few comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. I'd like to make a few comments, and I want to stand here because I'm representing the youth constituents, and they would not forgive me if I made my statement and people did not hear about it. My colleagues, Honorable Minister, Excellencies, fellow colleagues, I'm here representing a multilateral institution, the African Development Bank. My colleagues are representing member countries. They're actually implementing a lot of the land policies that you put in place. Now, I was very happy to see the theme of this year's land policy conference, which puts the youth at the center. This is, I'm very interested in this because I run a program at the African Development Bank which focuses on youth in agriculture and empowering them. Now, the youth, as defined by the African Union and as the ADB as well, we consider these to be 15 to 35 years of age. And on the continent, we have 420 million youth within that category, or about 60% of the population. So whichever sector you're working in, whatever policies or strategies, we cannot leave youth out of this. Now, more than half of these youth are in the rural areas. So this is where land and agriculture becomes very important and key in whatever we're addressing. My colleague from Uganda mentioned that in Uganda, 77%, of the population is under 30 years old. And this actually is in many countries in Africa. In sub-Saharan Africa, the median age of the population is 18.3 years old. So we have a huge youth population, and within the world, it is still growing. Over the next 20 to 30 years, this segment of the population will still be growing, and the majority of them will be in the rural areas. So we have to have them at the center of whatever discussion we're having. May I ask by a show of hands, how many here are between 15 and 35 years old? Some people are cheating here. But I'm glad to see quite a number of hands, and yesterday, I think our sister who was representing the youth, Rachel, made a very strong statement. But the point I'm trying to make is that at these kinds of meetings, whenever I have sessions like this with the youth, they make it very clear that they are by far the big majority and the future of this continent. They should be sitting at the table with whatever decisions that we are taking. Now, I'll go quickly because we don't have much time. Youth unemployment. On the continent, we have studies at the African Development Bank have shown that every year there's about 11 million youth entering the job market or the employment market. About 11 million every year within this age group who are coming into the job market. But in terms of formal jobs that are actually created by our economies, it's only about 3 million jobs that are created. That leaves a gap of about 8 million youth without any formal jobs. But they have to do something, and they usually find something to do. And we find even those who are actually employed, those 3 million or so, well, even more than that, many of them are poor and employed in vulnerable, low-quality jobs within the informal sector. So what has the bank, African Development Bank, come to do about this? There are a number of strategies and policies and initiatives that we have, but today I'll talk on a particular one on the Enable Youth project or program, which intends to empower youth in agribusiness. Note, I'm using the word agribusiness, because if we say agriculture in the traditional sense, youth are not that much interested. They want to make money. They want to make a livelihood. They want to provide for themselves. If you don't make agriculture as a business, they'll obviously move to the urban areas where they perceive that they actually make more money. But there's actually great opportunities within the agriculture sector. So that is where the bank now has this Enable Youth program where we're trying to invest and empower youth. And why agriculture? Agriculture and agribusiness is projected to be a $1 trillion industry in sub-Saharan Africa by 2030. So there's great opportunities within the agriculture sector. And Africa is considered sometimes as the last frontier in terms of land and natural resources and water, because we have more than half of the world's uncultivated, agriculturally suitable land and water resources are within Africa. And this is agriculturally suitable land, not the deserts and the arid areas, but agriculturally suitable land is within Africa. So there's great potential there. There's tremendous growth in global and regional food and agriculture markets, and there's agro-based industries bring much needed jobs for incomes for the youth. Now, the Enable Youth program looks at empowering youth in quite a number of ways. In terms of investing within the youth, we have sort of three components with Enable Youth. We work on the enabling environment, on policies, and here's where land comes in. One of the key areas on policies for the Enable Youth is working on land policies within the member states. And we do this through a number of ways. The second component is on agribusiness incubation. How can we empower youth through training in agricultural practices along the whole value chain, but also in business incubation and business development, so that they have the skills to actually be able to run a business. And lastly, on access to finance. So we have a number of instruments and initiatives on assisting youth to have access to finance. Now, along the whole agricultural value chain, now we want to look at the whole value chain, not only at primary production. It's where most times when you talk of agriculture, we think of primary production. But the youth are very dynamic. They can intervene anywhere along the value chain, whether it's on production, on agricultural processing, on marketing, on logistics. So wherever the youth are interested in, would support them. But in the final analysis, where land becomes important, you have to produce something to be able to market it, to be able to process it. Something has to be produced, and that will be produced on land. So land is very important. For the Enable Youth program, very quickly, over 30 countries from the continent have expressed an interest to invest in Enable Youth. So far, we have approved over six projects in 6 countries, and about 50 projects are under preparation for the coming year. And a key principle for the Enable Youth program is that 50% of the participants are women. So this, I think, is very important. And Rachel yesterday made the point that not only think of youth, but also think of women also within that category. Now, maybe a couple more minutes on land and youth, why this is critical, but we'll have a chance to discuss this later on. Maybe I'll go straight to some of the recommendations, because so that I don't run out of time. One of the first key recommendations is that youth should have a strong voice in land-related policy decisions and implementation. So that's why I'm very happy that there are quite a number of youth who are here, but I have to make it very clear that it's important to have the youth within, sitting here, contributing to those to the decision making. And also my colleagues from the member states, I think they made it very clear that youth are an important part of their strategies, but I'd call upon them as well to make sure that the youth are sitting at the table. Second recommendation, stronger legislation, local institutions, and legal services for youth are needed to ensure that their rights to land are recognized and defended. Third, alternative approaches to ensuring secure youth access to land need to be considered, such as acquisition of land, group acquisition of land, cooperative farming, and a number of other alternative approaches. And fourth, in terms of youth-oriented advocacy is needed to improve youth awareness and empowerment. Yesterday, I think Rachel made it a very important point that youth lack information and knowledge about their rights to land. So in terms of providing them, advocates providing them the awareness and through education, through many other means, I think those are key important aspects. And I'll stop here and we can discuss some more later on about what the bank is doing, but I wanted to just focus on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. MPC. I'd like to take a moment at this point to recognize our traditional leaders who are here. Yesterday, they came in force. We had the opportunity to witness their presence within our midst, but we did not actually acknowledge them. And we want to do that and honor you, our elders and leaders, for being here and participating in this process. Thank you very much. Let's give them a big hand. Also, I want to call on Mr. Peter Sigler, representing the Swiss Development Bank Corporation, to make a few comments. Mr. Sigler, are you here? Yes, please, you can make it from the floor. Just a few comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Distinguished ministers, distinguished traditional leaders, distinguished participants. I keep my short intervention, but my intervention very short, because I think it was very rich what we have heard already, and I don't want to take time away from the room to discuss this very, very relevant topic. I also wish to first thank or congratulate us all for having now an ALPC established. I think this is a big step forward for us, all of us, in order to make further progress on good land governance. I'm always a little bit surprised to somehow see when we talk about the relevance of agriculture for sustainable development in Africa, and that combined with the demographic development in the continent, how can we then also see an aging of the workforce in agriculture? That kind of contradicts, you could think. So I have been able to participate recently in a strategy development process of our regional program Southern Africa, where different studies have been discussed as well. And one of the elements which came out there was that they said one of the major challenges for youth employment is access of land for the youth. So whether how interesting or attractive it is to work in agriculture is one question, and therefore also the point mentioned before, or to talk about agribusiness, is very relevant. But if there is no access to land, then it's very difficult, obviously, for youth to work in that field. So I think this is a very important element where we have to work. And in this regard, I wish just to put also your attention on an experience we've had also in Switzerland. My grandmother, she has had 7 siblings. Out of the 7 siblings, 4 had to migrate abroad because at the time there was not enough land for all young people to go into agriculture and make a living out of it. And that's not so long time ago. That was in the 1920s. So these siblings of her, they moved at the time mainly to Latin America and to the US and today's USA. And some left back, but that means at the time, and that's 100 years back, Switzerland was a very poor country at the time, purely agricultural country. And 100 years later, I think Switzerland is lucky enough to be among the richest countries in the world. So things have changed since. And what did change in Switzerland? We have been lucky enough to manage to put in place strong frameworks, regulatory framework to assure access to land and also tenure security. I think these two elements are crucial in order to kind of make a step in advance, like forward. Tenure security as well, because very, very easy. For example, here in Ethiopia, I'm based in Ethiopia, living in Ethiopia. Normally, I'm in this rotation scheme, so I have to leave the country already after 4 years. So I'm blessed to have a little garden in where I live here. And now the question was, okay, if you live here for 4 years, basically that tenure, if I'm lucky, I can stay 4 years, but not longer. So how much do I invest? I have a garden there, I have vegetables, I have fruits. There's luckily an avocado tree, very nice. But would I invest to put a new tree there if I have to leave in 4 years? I haven't put a new tree there because, yeah, I don't think I could benefit from the fruits. So therefore, a long-term tenure security vision obviously is very relevant if I want to be incentivized to invest in my garden, in my land. And in this regard, I think regulatory frameworks to improve access to land and tenure security are very relevant. And in this regard, also Switzerland is working together with ALPC and particularly also with IGAD, but also with other countries on making sure that regulatory frameworks like the African Union Declaration on Land Issues and Challenges, which in my point of view should be called African Union Declaration on Land Opportunities, that these declaration and its frameworks and guidelines can be implemented at the REX level, but also at national level. And I thank you very much that everybody is here to discuss this week how we can further progress as fast as possible on this agenda. I think it's very relevant and it's for the benefit of all of us here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sigler. In the interest of time, I will ask our panelists to make a few comments about recognizing and remembering that our development partners, African Development Bank, ECA, FAO, and of course the African Union, are all partners in playing a role to promote sound partnership between government and their citizens on how important the following evolutionary ways of thinking are regarding their critical land policy issues in their respective areas. The need to embrace participatory dialogue and inclusive processes at all levels of the policy formulation and implementation process, transparency and accountability of public officials and traditional leaders, honest recognition and respect for advocacy regarding the rights of women, internally displaced and other vulnerable groups, on critical land policy issues and concerns, and the extent to which participatory policies and legislative development, difficult as they are, have actually been part of their follow-through on the policy recommendations that they've made. Again, let me repeat. There's been a lot of evolutionary thinking about how to deal with land and land issues. Embracing participatory dialogue, inclusive processes at all levels of policy formulation and implementation. The focus on transparency, accountability of public officials and our traditional leaders. Honest recognition and respect for advocacy regarding the rights of women and vulnerable groups on critical land policy issues and concerns, and what strategies and steps you are taking to move this agenda forward, recognizing that at the center is the youth who are our future. A few comments from each representative before we close this session.
To sincerely thank this institution, the African Development Bank, Economic Commission for Africa, and FAO, for the critical role they are playing in assisting us how to promote equitable land governance in Namibia. Through the various legislations we have enacted, we embrace participatory dialogue and an exclusive process at all levels of policy formulation and in the implementation process. So our land redistributive program is very transparent. Normally what we do, because of the colonial policies we have inherited after a long protracted war for liberation, we convened a national land policy in 1991. Namibia achieved its independence in 1990, and in 1991 we convened the national land process, where all the actors, the officials, public officials, the president, the traditional leaders, the youth, the women, the peasants, everybody was involved, and we then decided what to do with the land reform program. And as a result, we created a budget, and through this budget is where we buy the land. Normally, we, at independence, almost 36.6 million of hectares of land was in the hands of the previous colonizers. And then we adopted the policy, the policy what we call the willing buyer, willing seller principle, and also another principle of the compulsory land acquisition. And we adopted another strategy also, that of buying land through the Agricultural Bank of Namibia. And we also started with the implementation of land tax on commercial agricultural land. All these have helped us then now to develop the Agricultural Commercial Land Reform Act of 1995, Act number 6 of 95, which regulates the alienation of agricultural commercial land, and also provides for the acquisition of agricultural land by the state for the purposes of land reform. And also this act vests in the state a preference right to purchase agricultural land. And also within this act, it provides for the compulsory acquisition of agricultural land by the states, and also it regulates the acquisition of agricultural land by foreign nationals. So we have now the land policy in place of 1998, and also the National Resettlement Policy of 2001. Yeah, now with regard to our achievements, government has, since 1991, we have targeted to redistribute 15 million hectares of land by the year 2020 through the willing seller, willing buyer principle. And we also targeted to have 5 million hectares to be acquired and redistributed through the National Resettlement Program, of which 3.1 million hectares has so far been acquired through a very transparent process. When government buys the land, we advertise in the local newspapers, and those who are willing to acquire the land, whether it is the youth, the women, even the disabled, they can then apply. And the other strategy was to acquire 10 million hectares through the Affirmative Action Loan Scheme that is administered by the Agricultural Bank of Namibia. Now, just to mention, since 1990, 513 farms measuring 3.1 million hectares have been acquired so far at a cost of 1.7 billion. 5,306 Namibians, consisting of 2,889 males and 1,404 females have been resettled, and 108,000 emerging farmers has so far benefited from the Affirmative Action Loan Scheme that is administered by Agribank at a cost of 1.4 billion. So we have made some achievements, but we have also challenges. The challenges are the exorbitant land prices for agricultural land, the uneven distribution of land offers in terms of location, the size and value of infrastructure, which outweigh the value of the land. Currently now, this redistributive land reform process, which we are carrying out now, has also caused some problems. People think that the land reform program is too slow, and we are now considering to convene another national land conference in 2018 to relook at the strategy for land delivery for the previously disadvantaged Namibians. So I should say we have done very well so far. Our processes are, as I said, transparent, and we are accountable to the Namibian people through the normal budgetary process, and we account for what we have so far bought, particularly the farms and so on. So I think we are on the right course now, but probably the next year we will have the second National Land Conference, where we will again relook at what we have done so far. Maybe I should end up there. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Before I go into the question directly, I would like to reflect on the issue of concern raised by the ambassador, probably from the Sweden embassy. I appreciate the investment you made on your garden. That is, but otherwise, with the concern you raise about the security of land, I don't think there is any problem in that regard. If there is, and then my government is also very keen enough to make any improvement in that regard. But otherwise, there are a lot of mechanisms, security mechanisms set. If the concern is to be referring to the rural land security issue, there are different lease mechanisms. So that period issue is not a big concern. Say anybody interested for investing in any land, even in the farmer's land, he can rent it from the farmers for up to 20 years. So this is subject to any improvement afterwards as well. So there is no problem, because the land laws of the regions as well as the federal status it boldly in this regard. So there are also lease mechanisms, different lease mechanisms, so that should not be a concern. Coming back to the question, well, the role of the partners in the development effort of any of the countries. First of all, and above all, I believe the change should come from inside. There has to be clear policy, there has to be policy will, and a commitment at all levels. Then change is realized. But otherwise, as our problems are immense enough, huge enough in different forms, and complex enough, but the countries and the people are also of low economy, low technology. Obviously, there is a lot of support we may demand and even deserve from the international communities and organizations. So this has been there for a long time, and I believe also this should continue like that in building the capacity of the implementation capacity of these countries, the developing countries, I mean, and sharing technologies, in financing many of these programs that they develop. Otherwise, they can, I mean, it is like my minister from Namibia has said, we have very clear, transparent, and participatory policies, strategies, and programs in this regard. And much of these programs we have in a way, those they are directly to benefit the people in the country, but otherwise they have also an international interest in that. I see it especially in the climate issue and the land issue. So it is very much important. We have to have a collaboration, and a cooperation is my point that I want to emphasize. Yes, through this kind of cooperation, we have registered successes in the SLM, in the land certification, and many other sector-level development programs as well. So I believe this should have to continue, and it would continue. Thank you.
I'd like to join the panelists in thanking African Development Bank, the ECA, and the FAO as well. Now, regarding the development process for the National Land Policy, this was indeed a very participatory process. Although it took quite a long time. We started developing it around 2001, and then it got formally approved in February 2013. That was quite a bit of time. It involved basically all of the members of the public, civil society, the private sector, the academia, central government, local level government, and other institutions as well. Now, regarding the particular implementation framework for the National Land Policy, this also we see as a kind of a participatory process, because even for the development of the National Land Policy, the steering committee for this was a multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary steering committee, and this is cascaded down to all the implementation working groups. For example, development of the review of the legal framework. It's the law review working group, the land information system working group, the sensitization focus group, and so on. So it is quite participatory in doing this. Now, whichever interventions we've had have been driven by identification of the binding constraints to socioeconomic transformation of our economy. And one of the main issues is that land itself, if not properly addressed, becomes quite a serious constraint. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about agriculture, infrastructural development, or related areas. It has become quite an important issue whenever we have had to discuss this. So in particular for Uganda, where we have an increasing population at the rate of 3.2%, there is a lot of pressure on land. So some of the things which we have tried to do now in terms of implementation of the National Land Policy have been actually assisted right from the time of development of National Land Policy, actually by the LPI through the framework and guidelines for land policy. We also took advantage, of course, of the VGGT guidelines. There are some specific programs which we piloted in some parts of the country, which will be scaling up in due course. But in terms of the current interventions we have right now, we are decentralizing the land administration. We divided the country into 21 zones. Into 21 zones, and we are moving to put together the infrastructure to ensure that land administration and administration is cascaded down to brought closer to the people. We have developed and implemented a land information system. We have now installed a land information system in 14 of the 21 zonal offices. What is interesting about that land information system that it has improved the cost of doing business. with an investment of about 23 million US dollars in 2013. By 2016, mid-June 2016, we had generated 88 million US dollars, which was a good, in terms of revenue generation, that is good, and also in terms of ensuring that there will be sustainability of operations. We have interventions specifically to assist in land acquisition through support to valuation, physical planning, as well as other land administration and management sectors. The other major thing which we are doing is to put in place a program for systematic land education and certification. At the current moment, the registrations in our country stands at about 20%. We hope to increase that to a much higher level by registering up to about 1 million titles in the next 3 or so years. One of the other binding constraints we normally face is that of disputes. So we are trying to put in place a mechanism for ensuring that there is some institutional arrangement put in place to be able to manage this in a multi-sectoral manner. Then the other issues are associated with capacity building. The challenges we have faced are not very different from what our panelists have referred to, but the main ones is the one first I mentioned was about the disputes, increasing disputes, and then the capacity needed to implement those very bold interventions we have already put in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In responding to your question, in 2016, the African Development Bank approved projects, investments worth over $10 billion. And all of those have to undergo a system which we call the integrated safeguards system. What that means is that this is a participatory dialogue where we ensure that all our investments, they are participatory at the community level, that is input at the community level, and that the projects are socially inclusive and environmentally sustainable. This is a system where the community has input into the project preparation, from the preparation planning throughout implementation. And depending on the categorization of the projects, the environment and social impact assessment is placed on the bank's website for all the public to see 4 months before the project is approved. So we have a very strong and robust system to ensure that there's transparency and accountability. I think another important facility that the bank has is the African Legal Support Facility. This is a facility that provides legal assistance to member countries in commercial negotiations, especially very large commercial negotiations, and in particular of interest to this conference for large-scale land transactions. So the bank provides legal assistance and transaction for the transactions. There's also quite a number of other initiatives. We have the African Natural Resource Center, which assists member countries in the management of natural resources, both renewable and non-renewable. And land governance is one of the key areas that this center focuses on. And we have a number of other facilities also to assist member states. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I know we ran out of time, but that wasn't deliberate, but at the same time, it's strategic. In the next 3 days, today, tomorrow, and Friday, we have designed thematic sessions, roundtables, side events, and poster events to give us opportunity to discuss and dialogue on various aspects of the theme of including youth at the center of our land policy strategies and our economic development strategies moving forward. Since we did not have a lot of time, I want to just make a comment about something that Mr. Gabriel Ntegu mentioned yesterday in the opening session. He said, land is at the center of our national development. And in fact, if you think about it, Africa is the geopolitical center of the world and the only continent that still has unexploited natural resources waiting to drive Africa's development. And from that perspective, refusing to reform is a resignation of hopelessness and substandard existence, something that we are determined not to let happen. I want to thank our panelists for their contribution today, for setting the tone for what we're going to be doing in the next 3 days. I know I did not give you a chance to ask questions from the floor, but in the thematic sessions that follow from today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, we have plenty of opportunity to dialogue, to discuss, and get to the bottom of the issues that pertain to the constraints, as well as the opportunities that we have for our youth. Our youth today are technology savvy, entrepreneurs in their own right, looking for opportunity. The least we can do is give them secure access to land resources as an asset and their own future heritage. And this is what we believe this conference is all about. Thank you very much. I want to call on Joanne to make a few comments about the program and the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ahene. Professor Ahene is the chairperson of the scientific committee that helped to select papers and to put together this program. We want to thank him and the scientific committee members. Many of them are present here. Let me ask them to stand, please, so that you see them and talk to them in the streets. Remy, please stand. Jolene, yes, thank you. Priska, Harold, Sheikh, thank you, Moha, for all the work that you have done. Thank you. I want to thank the panel as well, the panelists for starting out the morning and giving us something to think about as we move to the sessions. We shall move to the coffee and tea break that will be downstairs. I ask you to try and make it as quick as you can, as logistically possible to do so, and move to the sessions. You will see that we have 4 parallel thematic sessions. I just want to give you some information on where those rooms are. The first thematic session on land governance monitoring is in conference room 3 to the left on this floor. The conference rooms are clearly marked towards the end in the corridor over there. Conference room 5 is not far from here. It's also to the left. And that's where the youth and land reform thematic group will be. And thematic group 3 will be land access, the link between youth employment and a prosperous life. And that will be in conference room 6, also to the left on this floor. And the last one is the protection and support of tenure rights, a group which will be in caucus room 11. That one is upstairs. So caucus room 11 is upstairs. The stairs are to the left-hand side. Remember, coffee is downstairs. So some of you will be coming up 1 floor and some of you will be going 2 floors up. So I want to thank you for your attention. Just a small logistical announcement. We are aware we're supposed to be providing a small allowance for the sponsored participants, those who are sponsored by ECA. And we shall be doing that and making that announcement in the different meeting rooms once I receive the information on whether that is ready. So we are aware, we apologize for the delay, and we thank you for your attention this morning. Let's try and move to the various sessions. Thank you for your attention.